that is the secret sauce, if you like, that maybe gives us a slight advantage over other organisations. And I think that kind of manufactured view is obviously quite misleading. I think it is those spaces where you're not in control of the narrative that are the most important.
If you were starting an employer brand function from scratch today, what would you do first and why? Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name's Lewis Gray. I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at Disseminate. My co-host, as always, is Elliot Elsley. And joining us today is a special guest, Matt Eyre from Co-op. So I'll give a little bit of background on the episode in just a moment. But Matt, would you mind just introducing yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lewis. And thanks, Elliot. So yeah, I'm Matt. I work for the Co-op. My job title is Employer Branding and Colleague Value Proposition Lead. I've been with the Co-op for about 14 years now, but in my most recent role for just coming up to a year.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, we just for context on this episode for yourself as well, Matt, we actually spoke to somebody from a member-owned or a colleague-owned business about a year ago now on the podcast. It was a legal firm called Stephen Scone. And I thought it would just be an opportunity. Obviously, we're all very familiar with the Co-op here in the UK, but just to understand how you're approaching employer branding as a member-owned business, and then how employee advocacy and employee-generated content naturally ties into that. So how does the fact that Co-op is member-owned shape your approach to employer branding right off the bat?
Yeah, this very, very well-established business, 108 years old, fantastic history, historic roots. But what we tend to find is, particularly in the younger generation, people aren't particularly aware of our history, our heritage, and importantly, our ownership model. So we kind of can't be complacent in terms of people's understanding of that when we think about employer branding. But all that said, absolutely, our cooperative model, where identity as a co-op is at the heart of the way we seek to market our business from an employer branding point of view. You, I would assume, will have seen last year, 2024, we did not a rebrand, but a bit of a brand reset when we reintroduced Co-op to the UK around July last year, and you may recall a big television advert which kind of called out the virtues of member-owned organisations and the cooperative business model. And what we've sought to do recently with our EVP launch is to align and emulate that to some extent, but obviously focused in the colleague space. And a lot of that has been about emphasising the identity of our colleagues, not just as employees, but also as part owners of our business. So yeah, long answer to your question, but it is absolutely central to our employer branding tactics and strategy.
But you mentioned about the EVP. How do you go about defining a value proposition that speaks to such a wide range of roles and people as well? You mentioned about the younger generation.
Yeah, it's a challenge in an organisation like Co-op where you obviously span a really wide range of sectors, and you are targeting a really disparate group of audiences. The way that we approached it at Co-op was traditional in many senses. So involved a huge amount of secondary research, looking at insights that our colleague insight team had compiled relating to a myriad kind of measures of colleague engagement and how people feel about working for our organisation. But then we did a pretty significant piece of primary research as well, where we brought colleagues together from across all our different businesses in various different locations all over the country to talk about how we do right by them, I suppose, and also how we don't do right by them. Where do we kind of fail to meet our promises to them, to do right by them as colleagues. And what that made clear, I think, is that, working at Co-op feels different depending on where you're situated. And I don't think that would come as a surprise to anyone to hear. But there was a well, there are a few kind of golden threads, but the key one that we come back to is that bit that we covered in the first question, which is about purpose, and the sense that you're working for an organization that has a motive that goes beyond making money for shareholders or wealthy individuals, and we found that was present in every single business within the co-op. It was more prominent in some areas than others, and in some parts of the business people would define purpose differently. So our funeral care business is a good example of that. They are possibly the most purpose-driven cohort, group of colleagues within our co-op, but their purpose very much comes from supporting bereaved families and helping them to get through the most difficult time of their life. Whereas somebody like me in the support centre probably derives that sense of purpose more from the kind of community mission of the co-op and giving value back to our member owners, which is kind of at the heart of our purpose as a cooperative. So yeah, the purpose thing means different things to different people, but that was the commonality that we found, and that's why we decided to design the EVP around this idea of doing right by our colleagues. And the key pillar of the three EV pillars was the purpose one, and that sense of ownership that I mentioned. That's really important as well. We kind of saw that as a USP, I suppose.
It's interesting hearing and particularly I find this when we talk to larger organizations and when I've spoken to larger organizations over the years, the sort of directional objective of that employer brand exercise with larger businesses is so much more focused on the current employee base, the community that you've built within that, particularly with the co-op and everything that kind of encompasses. When we speak to smaller businesses that are scaling up, things like that, the objective on the employer brand is how do we just attract more people, and that's that's the kind of primary objective behind everything that they're trying to do. How do we outwardly show everybody about everything that we do so we can bring more people in to the camp? It's interesting, as businesses get larger, it's actually we're going to focus on what's in the camp, and I suspect by the sounds of things the kind of talent attraction side of employer brands, that visual sort of look from the outside, is almost like the secondary part of it for you.
To some extent, yeah. I think with a smaller organization, there's probably more of an opportunity to define an EVP and then kind of almost build your culture around that idea. Whereas, with this kind of big monolithic organization like the co-op, we simply cannot flex our culture accordingly if we come up with an innovative way of marketing the organization to external audiences. It's kind of received employer branding wisdom, but the dream you sell obviously has to match the reality when people land. But equally, we're quite candid about the fact that our EVP, which we call a colleague promise, by the way, it describes co-op at its best, and we're quite open, certainly in the way that we talk to colleagues, but I think probably externally to some extent as well, that we know it doesn't feel like this. We know not every single one of you is living the dream each and every day, but actually each of the pillars and all of the various kind of proof points that line up under each of those pillars, these are based on real colleague experiences. The promise is that we want to work towards a point where more and more colleagues feel that tangibly in their experience of working for co-op every single day. Yeah, part of the work that we're doing in the culture space, broadly speaking, in co-op is not just about making promises and painting pretty pictures. It is about fixing things where we see the opportunity to do so, and we have some good examples of where we've already done that since we launched the promise, which has really boosted colleague engagement, and we can evidence that. But to kind of answer your original question, Elliot, I think yes, you are probably right in that the colleague promise has more utility as a tool to drive colleague engagement, but I wouldn't want to discount its importance as a tool to attract people as well, because that's where I've come from. My previous role prior to this was leading on talent attraction, recruitment, marketing for co-op. So the job has changed, but that's still foremost in my mind.
Quick one. If you've ever wondered how your employee advocacy efforts are actually performing and not just what you think is happening, Disseminate offers a free employee advocacy health check. All you have to do is provide your company name and our team will pull real social data on how active your employees are, what impact it's having, and then how you stack up against your chosen competitors. So whether you're assessing the performance of your employee advocacy program or getting a benchmark for a future program, these will be the insights you can act on. The link's in the show notes. Well, Matt, I wanted to come on to trust because it's been a recurring theme with employer brand leaders that we've spoken with on the podcast, and I guess just within the industry as a whole in recent years. Obviously, coming from a post-COVID world where we saw, layoffs and redundancies and things like that, if not, just employees being furloughed en masse, and now we're coming into the world of AI and layoffs that kind of come with that as well. So something that we're hearing a lot of employer brand teams trying to influence from the inside out is, trust within the organization. But for yourself, how can employer brand teams influence trust when they're not always in control of the message? And then how do you approach that at the co-op?
Yeah, so I think it is those spaces where you're not in control of the narrative that are the most important, right? So that's where your employer brand will be kind of validated or trashed, essentially. And it's obviously it's difficult. We've kind of touched on it already. It's difficult in a big dispersed organisation like Co-op, where you have microcultures in stores or funeral homes, for example, where individuals might not live up to the behaviours, the values that we define, and that could be a kind of derailer for some of the things that we say in the EVP, and that will inevitably play out in places like Breakroom, Glassdoor, Indeed, so it's visible in the external space. And I think, in my mind, the only thing that you can do there as a big organisation certainly is encourage advocacy to try and ensure that there is a balanced view for users. But equally, I think you can go too far with that. So, that in itself can be a breach of trust. And I know of certain organisations, won't name names, where adding a positive Glassdoor review is something that you are essentially obliged to do as part of your induction process. And I think that kind of manufactured view is obviously quite misleading. But I think it's also quite easy to spot most of the time. People are accustomed to seeking out the real unvarnished view of what it's like to work in an organisation. That's a standard part of searching for jobs. I think genuine advocacy, encouraging genuine advocacy is a great thing. Trying to provide that balanced view is really important. Giving colleagues a voice, accepting that sometimes it might not be easy to hear what they say when they use that voice. I think that's kind of a key part of our culture, and central to the way we manage our employer brand. So, we don't claim for a moment that we're perfect. When we get things wrong, I'd like to think we try to engage constructively and where possible, put things right. Coming back to some of those kind of mechanisms that we have in place that I referred to earlier. But I think what we can say credibly is that everything we do as an organisation is done not in the interest of simply making money for wealthy individuals or shareholders, as I said before, but it's to do right by our members and their communities, and obviously our colleagues are part of that. And I think that's perhaps not a unique feature, but it's an unusual feature of our culture in that we have these values that I think there's an inherent trust within the colleague base, and that's probably in part to do with them being so historically grounded and ingrained in the organisation. I don't think you'll find many 180-year-old businesses that were built on an idea which is something other than let's make as much money as we possibly can.
I think it's really interesting to hear about the Glassdoor side of those things because, yes, without naming names, I think we've all seen different businesses with exclusively positive reviews. I think there's so much value in showing the other side of things as well. You know, like most people, if I go and look at something I'm purchasing, jobs, careers, whatever it might be, you default to look at the bad reviews because you want to go, okay, what's the reality of the bad things that happen here? Are those things that actually for me I can live with and are things that don't seem that bad? That's the way most people, very few people read every single positive review of something. They'll read a couple and go, okay, that's interesting. Here are the positives that I'm seeing, but I want to know what's under the hood, as they say. It's good that, and it's just nice to hear that that's like a reality for the business of we accept that. It might not be something we always want to see, but we'll act on that.
Yeah, it's not always easy, but you know, there is a culture. We have internal social media, and you get lively, healthy debate on that on a day-to-day basis, which can at times be controversial, but is, I think, a useful means of colleagues being able to say what they think. And our CEO, Shireen, is absolutely fantastic in terms of, number one, engaging and doing so in a constructive way, but actively encouraging that kind of openness and asking colleagues to be candid within the boundaries of civility and not saying anything overly controversial.
I think I'm glad to hear you're touching on the negative reviews as well there with the Glassdoor thing, because I just assume now, whether it's, I'm buying a product or whatever it might be, I just assume the overwhelmingly positive reviews are either paid for or they're fake or they're forced or something along those lines. I always think of Amazon as the prime example. I know there's so many botted reviews and things like that. And 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, if people do have something to say after an experience, they'll only say it publicly if it's something negative. But I guess this is where employees can come into the fold while they're working for the business, and this is what you've alluded to previously, Matt, about encouraging advocacy in a healthy way. So, how are you doing that currently at the co-op? How are you surfacing and showcasing those colleague stories?
So yeah, I mean, storytelling and colleague advocacy is kind of pretty central to the employer branding strategy. The careers website obviously plays an important role in that. So, we can serve videos, blog posts to users in a kind of section of the website that's dedicated to colleague stories, but also as related content in relation to particular roles or particular bits of information that users might be seeking out on the website. So that enables us to be a little bit targeted with the way we disseminate the content. Social's obviously big for us, so we have a social media manager who is kind of dedicated to supporting with employer branding stuff, and he works with me. He works with me on the employer branding content plan. So we do a lot on LinkedIn, unsurprisingly, paid and organic, a lot of paid stuff across Meta platforms. We have in the past year been doing a lot more on TikTok as well, which has opened up new possibilities in terms of the kind of content we create. So yeah, those are probably the key avenues for and I mean, as far as colleague advocacy is concerned, we have a social advocacy platform as well, which enables colleagues to take content, and it's not just employer branding content, and I suppose put their own stamp on it, use their own words, and share it with their networks, but to do so in a way that's kind of consistent on brand, whether that's from a kind of EVP or a wider master brand point of view.
I mean, it's what we find time and again is, you'll have colleagues who are willing to create content. They understand maybe how it might benefit them as well, especially when you're talking about LinkedIn from a personal brand perspective. But I think these tools, obviously, at Disseminate, we're providing an employee advocacy tool. It helps people who perhaps don't know what to say. So maybe they want to post, maybe they understand why they should be doing it, but it's just, hey, here's some content is relevant to you in your role, and then, like you say, they can then go and put their own spin on it and do things that way.
Yeah, quite. And I think that's the majority of our colleagues. So I saw I can't remember what the organisation was called, but I'm going to meet with them in the new year. But there was a a kind of league table that was created of all the supermarkets, which was shared last week, and I was very pleased to see that we were top in terms of the percentage of colleagues kind of promoting Co-op organically on LinkedIn. And I think that's probably linked rather to the EVP launch, some of the work that we did to encourage that advocacy. But yeah, the majority are keen, I think. And again, I think this comes back to our purpose as an organisation, and that's perhaps what sets us apart from other businesses. People have a slightly different motivation. If we think about why they work for Co-op and why they continue working for Co-op, even through some of the challenging times that we've had this year. But the majority are keen to advocate and willing to do so, but yeah, many simply don't know where to start. So if you can provide them with the tools, the resources, and the words in some cases, and that flows from the EVP, then that's going to boost the numbers in terms of the people who are actually willing to do it. But then you do also, and this is a kind of growing cohort now, have a group of colleagues who are actually quite active and experienced content creators away from work, and that's the group that I think going into 2026 we're going to look to tap into more. We've done quite a bit with a select group this year, but I suspect there's a bit of a kind of treasure trove of colleagues out there who we could tap into and leverage in that way.
I think it's really helpful and unique from a perspective of the Co-op as well. It's something that I talk about when we talk about advocacy and onboarding, and I've worked with some very large enterprises over the years. The natural challenge is like, who do we identify to onboard onto a tool like this, to bring into the fold? And the term I always use for people for identification at a kind of grand scale is who has the biggest vested interest in the business's success, because that's a very easy way, no matter what the business is, that's a very easy way to identify who's likely to be interested in doing this, because actually they've got a commercial interest, they're in sales, they're in marketing, they're in HR, like it's valuable to them. With the Co-op, everybody has some degree of vested interest that maybe grows, ebbs and flows for different people, but it's a unique position to be in where you are a cooperative. Everybody does have some kind of piece of the pie.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that is the secret sauce, if you like, that maybe gives us a slight advantage over other organisations who don't have that kind of core purpose. And I know every organisation purports to have a purpose beyond profit, but I think I would like to think that we can say it much more credibly than most. But equally, if I think about some of the people that we've been able to engage, some of those kind of experienced content creators, I think you're absolutely right. Typically, they'll have a vested interest, and we'll find that they're actually already creating content without us even having had to ask them to do so. Work related content, and their motivation might to some extent be about purpose and kind of getting the word out there about cooperatives and the great work that we do in society and in communities. But actually, it can be a bit more kind of prosaic in that. If I think about one of our colleagues down not far from London who regularly makes content about just simply what it's like to work. She's a store manager, and it's just what it's like working day to day in her store, and she'll break down the different processes, opening the store, closing the store, all the different tasks that people have to do day to day in the roles that our stores encompass. And she has a huge following. Like I genuinely, before kind of spoke to Claire and was switched on to her content, I didn't realise quite the level of appetite for this stuff, which isn't particularly groundbreaking in any sense, but it does give a fantastic kind of unvarnished view of what it's like to work in our stores. A really positive view, because she's quite a skilled editor. I think she's been doing it for some time, but we need that stuff as much as we need the big look at our wonderful altruistic purpose. Giving people the warts and all view of what it's like to work in a store is really important. Yeah, I think hopefully we'll be doing a lot more with Claire and others like her next year.
I think that authenticity it just makes a big difference. People engage so much more in like raw kind of authentic content that people are creating. Just from a perspective of, as a large retail business, you have a kind of frontline staff element, a retail staff element, and a back office. Do you approach those two things differently? In my experience, generally, the expectations of retail are lower and smaller, and you find those nuggets of gold, like you've kind of explained. And then back office, it's a bit more of a realistic expectation to be kind of perpetually doing this.
When you say back office, do you mean kind of support functions?
HQ.
Yeah. I mean, necessarily you approach them differently, and as part of the EVP, the colleague promise, we created personas looking at the different groups of colleagues that we have within the business, and I suppose their needs as an audience for kind of colleague engagement, comms, and work in that space. And very different requirements. Stores is obviously by far our biggest cohort, and we, the nature of roles in our stores is that they are incredibly busy, fast-paced, very, very, very varied, but they don't have a great deal of time, being completely honest, to be sitting and reading colleague engagement comms. So where we have opportunity, we need to kind of hit them with stuff that's going to resonate, and we'll catch their attention, and we'll be kind of valuable, useful to them. Utility is a really important part of it. So in the food space, in this food store space, a lot of it's focused on, what are some of the incredible benefits that we have that are going to make a difference to people's lives at particular points over the course of the year, switching them onto those, making it easy for them to access them, and with the kind of back office support center kind of cohort that you referred to, there's more opportunity to have a kind of greater bandwidth. So we don't preclude doing comms on the different kind of reward and benefits things that I mentioned in relation to stores, but you can do much more around the purpose side of things. But that needs to be the golden thread. I know I keep saying that phrase, but I think the magic happens, and that's from a kind of internal and external point of view, where you can put the prosaic hygiene factor stuff together with the purpose stuff, and that's when you get the sweet spot, I think, in terms of colleague engagement at Co-op.
Well, Matt, I had two more questions for you, but actually in the question before this one, you've answered it already, which is what you were planning to kind of prioritize and really hone in on in 2026. Appreciate you touching on that. You mentioned on kind of leaning into those natural creators. So as a final question, this is more just general to employer branding, I suppose, but we've spoken a lot about advocacy. So if you were starting an employer brand function from scratch today, what would you do first and why?
Probably depends where this function was going to be situated within the organisation, to be fair, because I think you see them in different bits, whether it's TA, HR people, marketing, comms, but let's assume that it's like a co-op. It's situated within the HR people function. I think the first thing I would do would be to make sure the chief marketing officer, the comms director, the brand director, whatever that structure might look like, but to make sure all these people are kind of understanding of, on board with, supportive of what we're planning to do, what our objectives are in this new function. I've been involved in 3 EVP projects at Co-op, only led the most recent one, and I am certain that the reason this one that we did most recently has landed and is kind of now permeating pretty much everything we do from a colleague engagement and talent attraction point of view at Co-op, whereas the others didn't previously. And it's been nominated for a RAD award. I should just add that in. Had to get that in somewhere. But I'm convinced the differentiator between this most recent effort and the previous 2 is that we had that alignment with what Co-op were doing in the master brand and the customer space, and we had those expert voices from brand, comms, marketing present throughout the development process.
So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. For everybody listening, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Definitely go and connect with Matt on LinkedIn to follow all the good work that he's doing there. But Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I hope there was some interesting stuff in there. It was a pleasure to meet you both.
Absolute pleasure. No trouble at all. Take care.
Cheers, guys.